Mm-hmm. All right, so cool. We're live. So, hey, everybody, this is me, the Undead Viking. You probably know that already because of the fact that you are watching my channel on YouTube. I am Lance Mikester. I have two of my role-playing game friends. It's kind of weird. These are two people that I've admired from afar for a long time, just as like a consumer of their products and their creations and what have you. But as luck would have it, because of my so-called gaming personality and fame, quotation marks, luckily enough, I've become friends with them, even though I've never actually met either of them in person. But I have Zach Glazar, or I like to call him the Laser Man.
It's Glazar.
Oh, yes, okay. Glazar. But and Zach, you've been on the show before, so welcome back. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing just fine.
Excellent. I kind of have this is like, and I've had him on before, and it's kind of a rarity. So whenever I do manage to pull him in and get to talk to him for a while, I do have Bill Webb, the mastermind behind in what, in my opinion, is the greatest mega dungeon of all time, Rapanathuk. And also the CEO and head creator and poobah or whatever of both Necromancer Games, which then now has become Frog God Games. So, Bill?
Well, thanks for having me on. Thanks for having Zach on. I'm doing great, man. Doing great. And, usually we only talk during Vikings games, right? So it's good to be on the channel again.
So I knew we were going to end up talking Vikings just a little bit. So I just want to get that out of the way. So Bill is a huge Vikings fan. I am also a huge Vikings fan. During Vikings games, I can always count on a few texts from Bill, and usually because they're doing something stupid or they're just making poor choices. And
all right.
the Saints game, though, I mean, and that was,
oh my god.
I mean, that was like the biggest. I mean, in a weird way, it really made the ultimate like horrible loss in the championship game kind of easier to take. Is that how you ended up like?
Yeah,
feeling?
Pretty much. I mean, there were 5 lead changes in the last 2 minutes and 30 seconds. So yeah, when that was a heart attack game. I mean, that was like go take a Xanax. As soon as the thing was over, because I wouldn't have been able to sleep for like 3 days. But yeah, it was easier. It was easier to take. I still would have liked to have seen him in the Super Bowl. I think the odds makers and the networks would have liked to see him in the Super Bowl too. But it's nothing new and different. I've been a Vikings fan since about 1971 or 72, and they've been breaking my heart ever since. They always get that close, and then they don't quite pull it off. So I'm fairly used to it. I mean, you remember, what was it? Was it 92 or 93, Lance, that they were 15-1 and had like the #1 defense, the #2 offense, and they lost in the first round of the playoffs. I don't remember which one that was. They got murdered.
Yeah,
too.
I remember. Yeah, I remember exactly which time.
Yeah. They lost like,
and then of course the
30-10 or something. They lost.
Against the Gary Anderson missed field goal in '98, and then the 41 donut in the championship game against the Giants. And, it's just I did. We'll get off that. We'll actually
we'll get off that. All right, so
we'll get off football. We'll get off football. So I will say one thing. I did after that loss. And Cubs won the World Series. The Vikings are now considered the fans of the Vikings are now considered the most tortured sports fans in all of professional sports. So we've got that going for us. So
yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing.
Yeah, regardless, what it is.
Yeah. so all right, so
go ahead.
It is totally what it is. So Bill, I've heard some of these stories before, and we're going to kind of go over a lot of ground but I want to. So you are the guy, the man behind the gaming company, the role playing game company of Frog God Games that was Necromancer Games. But you must have started off give me. I don't want to go from DNA to this point, but I mean, if we could give you kind of a background, how did you ever start playing tabletop games? Like, and it doesn't have to, it could be board games, it could be whatever, but like, how did you actually get into playing Dungeons and Dragons in the first place?
This is actually a really topical story because I found out recently that got one of the two guys who taught me how to play D&D had written an article for a magazine called Spartan Magazine back in the 70s. So I was friends with, the neighborhood guys when I was growing up, and I was about 11 and a half years old. I was not quite 12. Because my birthday's in November, and it was right before Christmas. And a group of guys taught me how to play D&D. And one of them was in college, and he was a guy named Steve Peterson. Another guy named was Buck Williams. Another guy's name was Scott Stavert. And those of you who've read the Black Monastery have seen his name in print before. And another guy's name was Richard Oliver. And I think Richard was the second youngest, and he was a senior. He was a junior in high school at the time. And the rest of these guys they'd all either there was a couple. One of them was a senior, and the rest of them were in college, and they were home for Thanksgiving, and they taught me how to play D&D. So I told my parents that I wanted this game for Christmas, and this would be 1977. I guess it was 77. Might have been 76, but I think it was 77. And they bought of all places, Nordstrom's had the white box set for sale. And, all they had was the white box set. So my parents bought me this white box set, and I got the white box set, and I was so excited. But, of course, I barely knew how to play because I played like one game before. And at the time, Steve was one of the owners of a company called Balboa Games. It was he went to Caltech, and he was at Balboa Games. And they were publishing some books that are really obscure, weird ones. Zach could probably show a shot of one if you can find one in his collection, but called Warlock, and then the Warlock's Tower and Warlock's Menagerie and the Monkey God's Curse.
They're in my living room.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, they got a friendly. We had these like, remember those green and white pieces of paper that had the stripes that were on a dot matrix printer? We had a printout of what was called the Caltech Gamer Society's rules, and those are those books. And so I had this like giant printout, like 4 inches thick, of fold over, 18-inch long paper that you had to tear the sides off of the rules. And so I learned how to play by using, it was horribly complex. They had like to hit tables based on, whether it was a tentacle or a dagger or an enveloping attack or a large claw or a small claw, all based on the different types of armor, typical Caltech stuff. And so anyway, I learned how to play with those guys. And then I got at Christmas, I got my own D&D set. And I got the white box, and I read it, and I learned about it, and this all does tie into Rappahannock, believe it or not. And because I was the little kid, they made me be the dungeon master so they could all be players. And of course, they figured they'd be taking advantage of the little kid, but it didn't quite happen that way. I quickly became a pretty formidable DM, because back then it was really adversarial, right? The DM was trying to kill the players, but you had to follow the rules. Anyway, so with my Christmas money that year, I went out and I bought Teagle Manor and 2 sets of dice, and the dice were the real bank breaker back then, man. They were like $10 a set, and you're talking about 40 years ago. They were $10 a set, right?
I can remember when I lost. I remember I lost my 8-sided, and I had no idea how to replace it, and I had to like send away. And this is like in 1970. I had to send away in some like. Oh, I know it was. It was like we were rolling a D10 and just not accepting a 9 or a 10.
Yeah,
it was horrible. Anyway, go ahead.
Anyway, so I bought Teagle Manor, and I bought 2 sets of dice, and I bought I want to say it was it wasn't Tomb of Horrors. It was Hidden Shrine of Tomo-chan, I think, 1977. So January 77. And
the pastel one, right?
The pastel one, yeah. And so we started playing, and then I met more kids at school that played along with the high school guys who'd come over on the weekend. Of course, Steve went back to college, and Scott went back to college. And we kind of started playing, 2-3 times a week. And anyway, so then the interesting thing and the really cool tie-in to the Kickstarter that's going right now is this. I wrote a kind of an intro dungeon that was like the first kind of 9 levels of Rappahannock. It actually represents 9 out of the original 12 levels of Rappahannock, because the level 0, level 1, level 3A, and I guess level 4A along with what I called Tunnels of Terror back then, for these other levels of Rappahannock, were the original levels. Well, the tricky part with resurrecting the dungeons from back then, or we used to use notebook paper, and you'd have like a little, I actually had one that was one of those ring bound things that I'd write all my stuff down in. But when the players killed the monster on the first level of the dungeon and they got its treasure, you'd erase that from your book, right? and then
why would you?
Because it was dead, man. They killed it, so the monster was no longer there, so they couldn't go catch that monster again. Anyway, so here's the tricky thing. So a couple years later, Richard moved away and went to Alabama, and I hadn't seen this guy since the early '80s, right? And anyway, so we all went off to college, and yada yada yada. And of course, I had most of Rappahannock that wasn't erased because I'd written it in pen, and so I'd only crossed out stuff. And then when in college, Clark and I typed it all up into kind of the rough form of what you guys see today.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you because you mentioned Clark. Tell people who Clark is.
So Clark Peterson, the father of the open gaming license, he was a fraternity brother of mine at Washington and Lee University in Virginia in the early '80s, and he was in my D&D group there. And so we played D&D, when we weren't chasing girls or drinking beer or going to frat parties. We played D&D and occasionally stopped playing D&D to study. And so we played, I don't know, 3-4 times a week. There were the guy who played Spiegel the Mage is a guy named John Murdoch. Dale Haynes was Flail the Great, the Cleric. Ian Thompson was Helman the Hobbit. A guy named Pearson Keys was Fracture, the Dwarven Fighter, and then Clark was Banner, the Paladin. And that was the group in college. And then a guy named J.P. Johnston had a wizard thief that was called We or They, or he always had it was a schizophrenic guy because he was multi-class. So my wife just brought me dinner. Thank you, baby. So anyway, so that's how I met Clark. But anyway, so back to Rappahannock. So I ran into Richard at a convention 4 years ago, 4 years ago. And he said, I think I've still got Xerox copies of all that stuff you gave me when I moved. And lo and behold, he emails me all my original notes from all the Tunnels and Terrors levels. Now, the only levels of that I was able to kind of piece together I'm not kidding, with charcoal rubbing the backs of the pages are in Rappahannock expansions. And so the first expansions book we had out had the Bandit Lair and a couple other things in it that were, the old ruined castle with the Bandit Lair and stuff. And I was able to get pieces of that. But Richard had the whole thing. And so in this new Kickstarter, all the original levels of that dungeon are in it because I got him back and we resurrected him and we rewrote him because he actually had all my notes. It was 50 pages of stuff that he had that it was long gone. It was gone. And he had all the maps. He had all the map notes and everything else that hadn't been erased. When I went to college and stuff. And so I'm pretty excited about that because I was able to get, at least it was 6 or 7 new levels. A couple of them I was able to resurrect before in expansions, but I was able to get all of those levels done and into the main book except for one of them. And that one we worked on, and that's the bonus module. Tom Knaus and I worked on that one, and that's going to be one of the bonus modules. So that all the original levels are back in 19. The ones
question here about
go ahead.
Yeah. The question from Kabuki Kid is, I want to know if anyone went through the entire dungeon because it seems so insane. And he wants horror stories if it's true.
Horror stories. Okay. Well, as you can see, Kabuki Kid, if you read level 15 that I wrote, basically, okay, no one's ever gone here. And this is for the DM to have fun and read. So the answer is no. The deepest anyone's ever gotten, and level 15 was sort of written as a joke by me because you don't really go fighting God, right? Certainly not in OD&D, which is what I've always played. That being said, I've had a number of players get really deep in there. So certainly the Goblin City, level 11A with the vampires, people been there. The levels that they, all the upper, probably anything less than 9 has been visited by somebody. Any level with a number less than 9, except for the down the well one and a couple of the others that are sort of booby traps. So things like the Lord Navarre on level 9A is one of the nastiest encounters in the entire dungeon. That actually has been breached before, and the Death Knight, and then the Demi Lich in the Leoman's. I can't write that in the book, but it's the Leoman's chest, the Demi Lich skull in it. That's his girlfriend. People been there. Level 13. I can't remember if it's 13 or 13A now, but the one with the evil temple, that one's been reached. But I think it's 13A. But no one's ever been to level 14 or level 15 of the dungeon. Other than that, pretty much yes. And all the wilderness areas, absolutely, people played in. The bandit encounters, everyone's encountered. But the sort of the grand finale against Orcus, yeah, nobody in my game's ever done that.
Well, I did see. I think I saw a video online of like somebody actually running. I mean, they may have just put the players on that level to do the encounter. But as far as like actually organically, reaching that level, by spelunking the depths, I don't think so. But because I think there's a video out there of people actually attacking Orcus, and then and Orcus just handing them their hats, so to speak, and sending them on their way.
Skeeter Green's run that as a convention game a few times too. He runs level 15. And
I think that's actually the video I saw.
Yeah, honestly, it might be. Skeeter. They actually came pretty close to beating it until they figured out it was a projected image. And then they were out. They did all their 1-round tricks, and then it was a projected image that they were fighting. But so he did have one group that successfully defeated the projected image of Orcus before Orcus smushed them all in the following couple rounds. But that probably is the video. But yeah, no, I've never had anybody get that deep.
Okay, nearly. So I'm gonna go back. Back. Where did the idea for for one, Rapanathik come to mind, and two, like the idea of like why a mega dungeon? Because I can assume before you actually like made Rapanathik, you did other stuff too. And that you put these guys through, that you were the DM of.
Well, so
just kind of walk me through that a little bit.
If you go back to your D&D archaic lore, and you open up a white box set or a brown box set, and you pop open book 3, which is the how to run an adventure thing. The first thing it really talks about for the underworld, and the other thing that inspired this a little bit was the Tecumseh setting and the dungeons underneath Jokala in the Empire of the Petal Throne. It basically says write a mega dungeon. It says write the first 5 levels and have them connect and apply tricks, traps, and monsters and that kind of thing. So the instructions you were given were traipse around a board of outdoor survival. You gotta almost get in the wilderness out of the wilderness into the dungeon, because the wilderness is too dangerous, because you're encountering you're encountering 4D10 werewolves and stuff. And once you're in the dungeon, then you have all these dungeon levels, and that's where they go find treasure and stuff. So mega dungeons was certainly some of the first stuff we did, because that was what the book told you to do. The other thing that is as old as that, and this all came from traipsing around the outdoor survival board, is the Sword of Air. And the Sword of Air was me making up a couple of wizards who didn't like each other, because if you walked within 1 hex of a castle, then you, on the outdoor survival board in OD&D, you'd roll dice, and if it was a wizard, they'd geese you to go get them stuff. And so the wizards in the 2 wizards that were in the Sword of Air, that are sort of the 2 protagonist antagonist type guys, that when they befriend the party or become enemies of the party, depending on what they do, actually were probably older than the mega dungeon of Rapanathik. That being said, I'm pretty sure that and you're really going back 40 years on me here, but if I remember right, those wizards are the ones that geesed the party to go to Rapanathik and pick them up toys. So they were sent into the dungeon to go get stuff, where the wizards didn't want to go in the dungeon, so they sent the quested party members in to do it for them. So that pretty much is the very origins of my campaign, other than running forays into Teagle Manor. were completely based on the Sword of Air book and the Rappahannock dungeon itself. The storyline is Sword of Air. I know you've read it, Lance, and I know Zach has. But if you read that sort of will tell the tale. And the Rappahannock was designed as the place for the players to go work for those wizards and do stuff and bring them, body parts of chimeras and stuff. So it was pretty early. Yeah, I'd say 77, late 70. By summer of 77, the first few levels of Rappahannock were actually drawn up. I can actually show people. I have props. I can actually show people some of the original notes. They look like this. I don't know how readable. That's not even readable at all.
Well,
these are like some of the original notes.
Scrawled Sanskrit or something.
Yeah, exactly. Look like this, right? And these are Xerox copies of the old original dungeon maps. Scott Stabbert was a phenomenal cartographer, and so he was a commercial diver after he got out of school, and so whilst waiting for him to surface from pulling things off of propellers at the Oceanus Yacht Club. In this case, I wrote level 8. You can see the Oceanus Yacht Club stationary there. We were on some rich dude's yacht, and I had about an hour while Scott was underwater doing stuff, and I wrote level 8. And I've still got a lot of these original notes. But so Scott would make maps. I'd hand draw maps that were kind of crappy. Scott would make them look really pretty, and then I'd detail stuff out. But we played.
I can assure you, this was the beginning of the master plan to have one happening here in 2018.
Yeah,
he's totally. Looking at the yacht. He's like, in 25 years, this is going to be a thing. But
I know.
Fitting it together, but it's actually basically pretty interesting. So it's more close to his vision.
All right. So you create this dungeon and you write and you create and you write and you create. So did you publish anything prior to Necromancer Games? I honestly, this is a question I don't know the answer to.
Really? I haven't told you the story before. Okay, so here you go. Scott Stabbert had his favorite dungeon, which was sort of a haunted house that disappeared during the full moon, or only appeared during full moons and stuff, and that's Black Monastery. In high school, I was the editor of the school newspaper. So I had access to the small local newspaper, and this is back when they used to do newspaper layout with wax paper and razor blades, and then you put them on a rolling wheel, and then you burn the image of that with a hot thing that would melt the wax, and the wax would leave impressions where the stuff was. And so he and I decided we were going to publish Black Monastery, and this is 1981, because I had access and free use of the newspaper. People thought it was cool as hell. They didn't mind I was doing it. All the newspaper stuff. So we typeset on wax paper the original Black Monastery, and I would love to. I'll show this some other time. It's buried up in my attic right now in my warehouse with in a sealed thing so that it doesn't get damp. But I laid it out with wax paper and razor blades, and we rolled it onto the roller, and we printed about 15 copies, and we sold it we kept a couple. We sold a few to the local game store for $8 a piece or something. And then the punchline on all of that was I was on the Aseum about 2010, and somebody had just bought like this treasure trove at a estate sale, and they found handwritten D&D stuff and all this other thing. And they posted a thing about, how do I publish this? And I actually replied to them, you can't, right? You can't publish this, because even though you own the original manuscript in this handwritten form, and it was like this 3-ring binder full of maps and stuff, and it's like, you don't own the intellectual property rights to do that. And then a guy named Mark Shipley posted up. He goes, well, hey, my brother-in-law had this really cool dungeon called the Black Monastery that he wrote when he was in high school, and I'll bet you he'd let us publish it. I have one of the original copies of it. And he shows this photograph of this thing, and I've got one too. And so it was the book that his brother-in-law was Scott Stabbert, and I hadn't seen Scott since he joined the Navy in like '83. But anyway, Mark married the guy, Scott married Mark's sister. And anyway, so we were able to get permission and do that. And that was pretty cool that we were able to resurrect the Black Monastery and pull that into a book. So that actually was the very first thing that I published with my friend Scott back in '81. And so that, that's that one's neither here nor there, because I think literally we made like 8 or 10 copies of it, and it would cost like $5 to make it, and we got paid like $8 by the local store, right? So, but I have one, and Mark Shipley's got Scott's old copy, and there might be another 5 or 7 copies of that thing floating around someplace, but it's a true artifact, the old Black Monastery. It even had the top scrolling was this like rubber stamp thing I bought him for his birthday one year that was a dragon breathing, and so it was like one of those things you could stamp along the top of a page. And then, like, if like a flip chart thing, if you flip it, make the dragon breath go. And that was actually the top stamp on that thing, which was kind of.
That was probably violating intellectual property too.
Probably was. I mean, some hippie dude at a Renaissance fair carved the thing, right? But it was, yeah, totally.
He's gonna find you now.
Yeah, I know. Well, we didn't use that on the Frog God version, but So anyway, so that was the first thing I published, and then I think a lot of folks know the story about how we started in this. Clark called me up one night out of the blue in 1999, and
this is okay. I'm going to interrupt you just so we have reference. So this is Necromancer Games,
the origin of Necromancer. Yep, it was just me and Clark.
Yeah. Okay. So there was Necromancer Games, and this was 3.0, right?
Yeah,
because 3.0 had just come out.
3.0 was not out yet. We had heard, obviously WotC had bought TSR. Some of us might have known some people at WotC who were sharing information. I grew up with a lot of those guys, living here in the east side of Seattle. And I knew they were going to redo D&D. Clark found out somehow that they were going to redo D&D. They hadn't announced it yet. And so he said, hey, we can publish for D&D. And I said, well, won't they sue us? And he goes, no, man. He goes, they can't. You can't copyright game rules. They have to let us do it. And so he sent them a letter and said we were going to do it. And I don't go into great detail on everything that transpired there because I'm on an NDA not to talk about it. But they said yes. And at 12:01 a.m. Of the day the Player's Handbook released, we released Wizard's Amulet. So we were the first publisher to release a book there. And then about a month, we got a deal with Wizard's Attic to do 3 modules that year. And before that ever happened, Stuart Wick called me. Stuart Wick from White Wolf called me and said, hey, they hadn't figured out they could do this. They said, hey, we understand you have a license to produce for D&D. We want to work with you under your license. And of course, we weren't sharing the information that we had. Anybody could do it at the time. And so instead of we had to get out of our contract with Wizard's Attic, pay them a little bit of money. And we went to work with White Wolf and Fiery Dragon at the time, which was the only other partner at Swords and Sorcery Studios. And then later, of course, Monty Cook Games came into that, and pretty much it was the 4 of us, the 4 companies who were publishing a lot of early 3.0 and 3.5 stuff. And their production. I mean, Shannon got a lot of it right in his book that he wrote that talk. We're chapter 1 of the 2000s, right? I mean, myself and Clark are mostly. I think we're about the first 30 pages of the Designers and Dragons book in the 4th book. He got a lot of it right. He missed some of it. He should have interviewed me. But
well, just so people know what you're talking about. What book? I know what book you're talking about. But
it's Designers and Dragons. And by the way, that series is excellent. I highly recommend people read it. It's really good. Shannon did a great job. Shannon Applecline did a great job writing those. And he missed a few finer points, but he got most of it right. And I actually know some other folks who were in earlier companies that he really nailed it. I mean, he really had it's a good historical series on the history of the game. He did a great job. But anyway, for a sundry of reasons, I made friendships through the industry, and White Wolf had a specific, number of slots that we could fill with White Wolf and Sword and Sorcery Studios because we're publishing for 4 companies. So they didn't want to have, a book every month, right? We pretty much were doing a book a quarter. And one of the things that I did pretty much independently on Necromancer was I started taking fan submissions. And if they were good, I took them. And if they were not good, I sent them back and told them thanks and everything else. Well, the problem is I got a lot of good ones. And so Those are represented, the fan submissions are represented by the G series for Necromancer, and then by the K series with Kenzer, because I couldn't get White Wolf to publish all my books that I wanted to publish. We were popping them out about one a month. And so the K series for Kenzer was all guest writers. The G series for Necromancer was all guest writers. And then pretty much everything I did with Troll Lord Games was guest writers. And so Necromancer started publishing through 3 publishers. And during the 3.5 era, we were incredibly prolific. I was literally developing and editing a book a month at the time. And these aren't short books. I mean, you guys have seen our stuff, right? You know, they were 150, 200, 300 pages sometimes. Some of the real gems that came out of that were, you know, Lost City Baracus was one of them that would be probably the most famous. And then I met this guy, Casey Christopherson, you know, who some of you might have heard of. I think he's written about 100 books in the last 20 years. He did just a ton of work. And so basically our big releases were going through White Wolf, and then the stuff that I wanted to do kind of on the side was going through Kenzer and Troll Lords for the most part, with the exception of G1 through 9 with White Wolf. Those were all through White Wolf. But then, you know, 4.0 happened. We couldn't really figure out what we wanted to do.
So now I'm going to stop you. I'm going to stop you at 4.0. I want.
Okay.
Yeah, no. I'm gonna actually stop you because I want to actually talk about a couple of things. So,
Okay.
One of the things I really liked about Necromancer games was there were 2 things that I thought you guys did really, really well. Besides coming out with really, really good stuff. I mean, you know, to this day, Stoneheart Valley for me is like one of the best things you guys ever made. You know, so you know, I could go on about everything that you guys published, but one, you guys had an excellent presence online. And I remember spending hours on your website and your message board, and like there was always people talking and discussing 3.0, and the authors and the publishers were very active on the message board as well, which was something that was excellent. The second thing is that you did that cool little thing where you put bonus material for all of your adventures. It was ingenious, really. It was like, oh, if you go to our website, you can download this PDF that'll add an entire new level to the dungeon or a wilderness encounter or whatever. And then like the secret password is, and it would be like the name of like a bad guy from that module.
Real quick here,
and then so you'd pull up the PDF file.
Yeah.
I just want to tell you that was a terrible idea, because I was the guy who went just recently and pull off all the DRM and make sure that I could find all the files that I had to go through the Wayback Machine, because none of these guys keep anything. And so I can have them available. So when people actually write in and ask, because they are really cool, they write in and ask, we can give it to you in a usable form. But no, they were a terrible idea from my perspective. I just want to make sure I had to be able to say that.
So here's the Lance, here's the gig with that. So we had page counts that we were told to make. So White Wolf would say, you know, you have 128 page. We need a book in this price range. So you have between 128 and 156 pages. And then, you know, like me and some other people we work with, you know, the writer might do 190 pages. So what were we going to do with that material? Well, it was all interrelated. I mean, the most prolific there would probably be Pat Loriger. I mean, he wrote, I can't remember if it was called The White Mountains or something like that, but the stuff for Hall of the Rainbow Mage was like 45 pages overwritten. And I had to cut it all because I had to get down to whatever the page count was that I'd been told to make as the maximum. Because we were printing in China, and back in the day, man, it was like not, there wasn't as much flexibility in what you had to do for printing. I mean, this is 15, 20 years ago, right? You had to stay in the requirements that you gave them, because you'd already priced it, solicited it. The stuff that now takes, you know, minutes, back then took, you know, days, because you actually print a copy of the stuff, you send it to the printer, and they print off your print copy. So you weren't there, you know, you weren't printing off of electronic files, because you couldn't transfer an electronic file like that. It was too big to transfer, and the files were enormous, man. They were like, you know, gigabytes back then. So it didn't work like it does today. It was much more difficult to print. But yeah, all the extra material came out that way. The one that got me in a little bit of trouble was when I put in the one that was you had to have module D2, the Vault of the Koatoa, to figure it out. No, it was actually Vault of the Drow, and it was the name of the vampire in Vault of the Drow in R247, the Vampire Lich Lair, right, or Vampire Succubus Lair.
Yeah, and I had to pull that out. Yes,
and people just raged, man. There was so much nerd rage going on because nobody could figure it out, and then a few people figured it out, and they wouldn't tell anybody because then they had the secret, and nobody else had it, and I caught so much hell for that from fans. I got hate mail letters because nobody could figure the thing out. That eventually, after like 6 months, I just published. I said, "Fine, here it is," and because people were so mad, but yeah, that was good. That was good that we did that. We still, I wish we still could. The difference now is that I like to get everything into the book rather than have people have to go print it out. We do give away a lot of free PDF stuff still, but the having a kind of a cohesive full book with all the material back then, when printing was proportionally far more expensive, would have been impossible to do and keep it in the cost range. Now, if I add 20 pages to a book, it doesn't cost that much more money. So that's the reason we don't do it anymore. It's just we stick it in. We still overwrite, as things like, I don't know. Have I got a trying to see if I have a neck breaker book. Yeah, copy of the Blight or something like that. I think I do.
I got one.
Yeah, I mean,
Blight.
Yeah, the Blight of my existence. The largest word count of
That
any
book is
ever.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's a big ass book, man. I mean, look at this thing. Yeah, that's
Yeah, I mean, okay. So if you're listening on the podcast, you can't see it, but it is how many pages is in that, Zach? Look at. He's not listening to us right now.
Yeah.
How many? What's the page count on Blight?
Well, it depends on which version it is, but the longest one depends on the version.
What's the page count?
926 for Pathfinder, something like that.
Yeah, 926 pages.
Nice.
Yeah.
So okay, so now I'm gonna actually ask questions, and I know asking you to be succinct is a little bit difficult, but so okay. So Necromancer Games, you've got all these things published. I mean, obviously Rapinethuk, when you got it out there, you got like the 3 modules, and you made the box set, and it was big, and it was big news. You guys, your stuff won awards and whatever. But okay, but then like 3.5 comes out, and then 4th edition comes out, and I can remember you actually posting. It's like, we're going all in on 4th edition. And you guys were excited about it and whatever. Now, I would love to know your personal opinion about the rule set of 4th edition.
Sure. Well, here's the thing: we decided to go all in, and then we went and played it. and actually, it wasn't a bad game, but it wasn't D&D. It was like a board game, and so and it was a miniatures board game. It was a decent miniatures war game. But we got done. I actually went and played a game, and sat into some playtest stuff and everything else, because we got advanced copies and all that other stuff. And then it wasn't that fun. Well, it wasn't D&D. I wouldn't say it wasn't fun. It was a fine game, and I actually enjoyed playing 4th edition a couple of times. But it was like playing Warhammer or something. It wasn't really like playing D&D. So. And then of course, the license for that required you not to sell books or publish in prior versions of the game, we wouldn't agree to. And so we decided not to do that. At about this time, Clark got elected to his judgeship for the first time. Clark was an attorney, and now he's a judge, and he got elected. He's an elected judge. And when he became a judge, his time disappeared. That and the fact that we both had a couple of kids. I had 2 kids. He had 1 kid. We both had gotten married in the interim, and just we were a lot busier. And then when it wasn't an easy thing to do because 4th edition wasn't really D&D, it was like, let's bag it. And the problem was, as I mentioned earlier, is that I had all these guest writers, the G series guys, who were writing books like gangbusters, man. And I had a half a dozen manuscripts, including Slumbering Czar, which is actually the biggest book ever made for D&D, that were written, edited, developed, ready to go, and all got canceled when 4th edition came out. And then the even worse than that was I had the maps and the artwork and all that stuff that the artist had done. And the contract with White Wolf back then was pay on publication. And so all these guys were not going to get paid. And so what I did is I paid them out of my own pocket because I felt obligated to. And basically became an eBay seller for the old Necromancer stuff to pay for that. And but I had all this stuff. And then when I kind of reunited with some of the folks over at Paizo, and Greg Vaughn asked me for the rights to his book Slumbering Czar back, which was like 750,000 words, right? This thing's huge. And I said, sure, I'll release you from your contract, because I had like a 10-year ownership contract of it. I gave it back to him, but he couldn't get anybody to publish it because it was too big. And so he called me and he said, hey, this is weird because it was this week in 2010 that this happened. Actually it was next week. Frog God's anniversary is April 1st, which is another funny story. When I get to the end of this part, it's funny. And so I decided what the heck, let's try it, man. I still had I was still on the Necromancer boards every now and then. We still had a couple of 100 hardcore fans that would buy anything I published if I thought it was good. They think it was cool. And we are all kind of like-minded gamers. So on April 1st of 2010, Greg and I made a deal, and I called Rick Sardena, who was the cover and interior artist, and I called Robert Altbauer, who'd done the interior maps for us, and said, hey, and Chuck, actually I called Chuck, and I said, hey man, we're gonna publish this book, and I guarantee I can pay you something from zero to something. Because we might not, because we might not sell any, but if we do, I'll give you a percentage. And so we agreed on some percentages. I just said, this is what I can afford to give you, and they all said, sure. You were always a stand-up guy. You always paid us, no problem. And so we, on April 1st, Krista, my wife, and I sat down and filled out incorporation paperwork. Got it all turned into the Secretary of State, and we created a really primitive GoDaddy website that allowed people to pre-order Slumbering Czar for $125. And I thought we'd get 20 orders or something like that. I mean, I knew guys like Death Tribble and Solarian and those guys. I knew all those guys would buy it. I figured, I knew like Don and Jennifer Jones and a few people like that would always buy it because they bought everything we ever did. And we sold 45,000.
I'd like you to. You didn't mention me. Thanks a lot.
Well, yeah, and you, of course. We bought all the Necromancer stuff. Well, I mean, you were one of the guys on the boards. That's my point. You're already here. It was all the folks who stayed really active on the boards. But the weird thing is, so I sort of, in a way, I sort of invented our own Kickstarter before Kickstarter existed. But we sold 45. Well, first of all, after getting like 30 emails from all these people saying, okay, it's April 1st. You're kidding, right? They're like, you're kidding, right? This is a joke. We're not really doing this. And I was like, no, really. And I didn't realize it was April 1st. We sold $45,000 of this pre-ordered vaporware book that I had a manuscript, some of the art for, and some of the maps for, with a promise for people to work for free on the condition that if we made any money, I'd share it with them. And all of a sudden it was like, oh shit, Krista, I think we just restarted Necromancer Games. And I'm like, okay, well, we can't call it that because Clark owns half of the company, and so we have to call it something else. My handle had always been Sathaga. I'm a big Clark Ashton Smith fan. And so we had somebody swam me up a little logo with a smiling frog on it, and we named Frog God Games after Sathaga. And because of Slumbering Czar, that really is what did it. The other manuscripts that are worth noting there that we used to sort of, pave our way along. I had Splinters of Faith from Jeff Hartness and those guys. That was one of the dead manuscripts. I had Demon Heart from Anthony Pryor. It was one of the dead manuscripts. I had Eamonvale Adventures from Nate Paul. That was one of the dead manuscripts. So I called all those guys. As soon as we had all this money, it's like, oh my God, we got all this money. Let's publish all the rest of them. So I called all those guys, and everybody I could get a hold of was totally psyched because, of course, they'd written these books that got killed in 4.0, right? And the authors never got paid for them. The artists and the cartographers did. But I had these things almost ready to go. And so, I mean, Lance, you can remember 2010, we were popping out a couple of books a month. Frog God was. And it's because I had this huge backlog of manuscripts, art, and maps. And nobody got paid unless we made money. And so that was the deal. And so we sort of had this percentage-based deal. And of course, we're no longer doing that with most folks. We just pay up front now. But all of a sudden, oh my God, we had all this money, and what do we do with it? Shit, I guess we better make this big book. And I don't know if anybody remembers, but floating around out there someplace is Slumbering Czar modules 1, 2, and 3 in 3.5 form. That's a true rarity. Because it was only made for about a week before we made the deal and got a Pathfinder license. And so those of you who bought it on drive-through, I think you can still print the thing. You could have if you bought it then, but it got taken down. Someday I may put that thing back up just for the heck of it to screw over the collectors like myself. But there was actually Czar 1, Czar 1 through 3.
This is where I'm supposed to pop in and say we should discuss this later, Bill. And I'm done.
Right. You know, Zach, I see a convention special though, man. Slumbering Czar 1, 2, and 3.
This is where I pop in and say, I think that you're talking good stuff, Bill. Let's talk about it later.
Okay, got it. Anyway, so then the rest is history. We brought on more partners, including the guy whose T-shirt is good next year is going to say "No, Bill" with an exclamation point. And we've added a lot of talent, and we've added some partners. We've lost some partners. People have gone off and do their own thing. It's all been really friendly. The Matt Finch story is actually kind of worth telling because that was about 6 months into Frog God. I decided that this Pathfinder stuff is great and people are buying it, but I don't understand it. And I never graduated from a white box set, right? So for me, that was weird because I couldn't. I look at 6 pages of the thing and it'd be one room because there's some.
That's another question.
Yeah, go ahead. The other question you had.
So that's a question I have for you, actually. Yeah. So like you published all this stuff because I remember the big thing for Necromancer games was 3.0 rules, 1.0 like first edition feel, third edition rules, first feel, which I felt was very, 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 very true. So, did you play third edition, or did you?
I briefly learned how.
No, but did you personally play third edition? You say you're an OD&D guy.
Yeah, I'm an OD&D guy.
Did you play third edition?
I did it conventions sort of poorly without using most rules because everybody wanted to play 3.0. But really, in my home game, which is it never really left chainmail in a lot of ways, right? So no, I never. My home campaign's never been anything past an OD&D game.
So he does play in a 5th edition game almost every other week.
I do know. Yeah.
And even the people in his game has assured me he actually is learning the rules, and so this was true up until this past year. So
well, I mean, okay, Lance. To be fair, it's because Steve Winter and I are really good friends, and Wolfgang Bauer and I are really good friends, and so I stay at Wolfgang's when I work in the city, and they had a 5e game going. So who's going to say no to that? I mean, our players are like Steve, Wolfgang, Jeff Grubb, Stan Brown. They're all. It's all an old TSR pack I play with down there. And it's a really good game. Steve runs that, and then I run the OD&D game on Tuesday nights. So Steve runs the 5e game on Mondays, and I run the OD&D game on Tuesdays. Yeah. So, but yeah, I still play OD&D. But anyway, so the Finch story is, I wanted to publish.
So all right, so let's. All right. Well, I mean that's. Go ahead.
Okay, the Finch story is basically I decided you're right. I wanted to publish. Games. I wanted to publish books that I would use, right, in my own game, and so I went and bought all the retro clones on Lulu, right, and I sent them off to my lawyer and said, "Tell me the cleanest one, which is the one that's not going to violate any rules." And he said, "Well, some of them are okay, some of them are not okay." But this one Swords and Wizardry, whoever wrote this really knew what he was doing, man. He doesn't violate any of the trademark or copyright stuff from Wizards of the Coast or from TSR. He's actually thinking about looking you up anyway, because I'm really sick of doing the business part of this, and all I want to do is write books. And so he and I joined forces, and I brought him in for an equity piece in the company, and Matt and I have been partners ever since. And it looks like we may have lost Lance. We got you back? Still there, Lance?
I don't know.
No, I'm here.
Oh, you're there. Okay. Well, anyway, so that's how Finch came in, and we started doing sword and wizardry.
Yeah, I'm
books.
still here.
Okay, we started doing sword and wizardry almost as a loss leader. Nobody, nobody was buying. I mean, the sword and wizardry books at the time were like 10% of our market and like 30% of our cost. And so Pathfinder basically was paying for sword and wizardry because Matt and I wanted to make sword and wizardry books. So we did. And then that sort of caught on. Through a series of, OSR cons and OSR boards. And there were some people who were very upset that Matt became part of my company. I remember there was a post someplace that said, "Frog swallows Finch." And there was one of the posters was really mad. He was like, "Matt's selling out to this giant corporation." And I'm like, "Giant corporation? I'm a dude in my basement that my wife helps me with my database." And we sell a few books, and everybody thought that Frog God was the next incarnation of Hasbro, which, was basically me, my wife, and my daughter at the time. Anyway, so then that was a good thing. And then the other thing that really has made a difference, I'll talk nice about Zach here because he's on the thing, but no, seriously, is a couple years ago, I had decided we needed to add a new brain to the thing that wasn't one of the brains that already existed there, because we all sort of didn't know what we didn't know. And Zach was my first choice, and I think he thought I was kidding when I brought up the subject with him.
I was confident he was kidding.
Yeah,
I'll be honest. I was like, yeah, okay, he's drunk, and he's drunk with my friend Mike Ballato, so I know that this is just a joke. I'll wake up tomorrow, it won't be true. But
yeah, no, it was totally true. And
here I am.
Matt and myself and others had talked about we need to add somebody in an operations role, because A, I'm not very good at it, and B, Matt and myself were not having any time to create. And so we needed to add somebody who, was of like mind, knew everybody in the company, everybody liked him. And bringing Zach in is in the COO role has really made a big difference for us. And so that's sort of where we're at today. I mean, that's we're making lots of books. Sword and Wizardry has become a major business line for us. And then when 5e hit, we dabbled in it a little bit at first to see if it would be a good deal, and it's been really good for us. Our style of writing and our style of play and really fits well, I think, with 5e game. And so unlike 4th edition, where it just didn't jive for the type of work we did, it fits great. And we're all in on 5e, man. It's like I said, I'm even learning how to play it. Somebody was teasing me about that, saying I was cheating on Matt, but it was pretty good.
Hey, we have a question from the this chat.
Yeah.
The question is, he said, I guess space is a factor, but it was just curious, was it ever possible to dual stat some of the products so everything has swords and wizardry stats in it?
You can, but it's really messy. So it's part of the reason that we don't do that is that, those of you who, have picked one of our books up by the cover and tried to break your binding will know we make really, they're pretty expensive books and they're pretty high quality books. I hate double statted books. So I'm not going to say never, because of course Zach and somebody could overrule me on this, but I think it creates confusion and it sort of lowers the value of the product to me. So we're probably not going to dual stat stuff. One thing we're trying to do, being cognizant of everybody's pocketbook, is like with Rappanathic, the new Kickstarter. The only thing we're making for Swords and Wizardry and for Pathfinder is the new stuff, because you already paid $110 or $125 or something to buy a lot of the material in Swords and Wizardry or 5e. I know I acknowledge it's not all in like super sexy color and everything else, but we redid the maps so everybody can get that. And we're going to produce an art book for them so everybody can get the art if they want it. But I just didn't feel right about selling people the same thing for a big heavy price over again. So the new stuff will all be produced. But
we have one other question that I do want to ask Lance something real quick though. Do you want us to go over some of the future plans coming up real quickly? Because that's the questions related to City of Brass.
Well, I think okay. Well, let's do this. Put a pin in the City of Brass question. So, and then let me actually say this to so Bill, you've touched on Rappin' the Hook, and you kind of talking about the Kickstarter a little bit. So let's just talk about that now, since you've kind of segued there.
Okay.
So the 5th edition version of Rappin' the Hook is currently, there's like what, 10 days left, 8 days left, something like that.
I think it's 7 days, a week left. We're sitting at, I can actually look. We're sitting at almost $119,000, 1,263 backers, which is phenomenal. And with a week to go, it's got 119 individual mapped areas. So some of those are wilderness, some of those are secondary dungeons. Most of those, or about half or more than half of them, are actually the dungeon itself. So it has more levels, and they're well thought out levels. They're not random monster, and they're not 3 giant rats and 2,000 copper pieces type thing. They're actually well thought out and integrated levels that relate to each other. And it's been a lot of fun for me because I didn't have to do all the map tie-ins. Zach and Skeeter Green have had their hands full, but all of it ties together. It's got an enormous amount of new material. It's like this is the first time we've been able to publish sort of the original levels of it that were it was a side dungeon for it. It wasn't the main dungeon, because the main dungeon was the mausoleum and the well, but it was a side dungeon that kind of got you there. And it's the first time most of that stuff's ever going to get published. So it really is.
In color as well.
And, oh yeah.
Maps alone were so expensive. We ran a separate Kickstarter for them.
Yeah.
And we have, today was the last day where I made the last 2 changes. This pile of garbage is actually a pile of bones. You can't use the word beholder on a map.
Right.
Those are the 2 things I fixed today. And after 59 different maps, 59 levels of Rappin' Athic plus all the other maps, so 119 maps.
Yeah.
I think we're done.
Yeah.
Any color.
And the really interesting, Zach mentioned the maps Kickstarter. I should touch on that real quick, and then I'll move on. But so I told him no, Lance, when they told me they wanted to do Rappin' Athic for 5e, I told them no, and they said why? And I said, because the maps are going to be $30,000. And Zach and Skeet and the boys overruled me and ran a basically zero profit. Actually, it was a negative $3,000 Kickstarter to redo all the maps. And so that we love, but what that did for us, and this is the consumers out there who are buying RA. Well, first of all, thank you to everybody about the map Kickstarter, but the consumers out there who are buying RA, because of the efforts, the mutiny of everyone else who works for Frog God against my wishes to do that map Kickstarter, we were able to keep that book at about $100. And we would, in order for us to do that book, for us to do the Rappin' Athic book without having done that first Kickstarter for the maps, it would have been $150 or $160 book, which I wasn't willing to do. And so that's it wasn't my idea to do this thing for 5.0. I said no, and a lot of props to the guys, because they figured out a way to do it so that I could say yes.
So people, we're already. I realized I just didn't have you do this. So in your description, we've talked a lot about Rappin' Athic. It's your dungeon. You created it. If you had to describe to somebody what it is in in a short blurb or whatever, how would you describe Rappin' Athic?
It's a giant underground city. And if you're the bad guys, you're part of that city, and if you're the good guys, you're invading that city to steal their stuff. So it's really got something for everyone. It's not a level clearer dungeon. If you go in and try and clear levels, you're gonna get smushed. You shouldn't try and fight everything in that dungeon. You should maybe even look for things that you can become friends with, because there are factions, and there are monsters and bad guys in the dungeon that don't like other monsters and bad guys in the dungeon. but it is a giant underground complex with a series of really fun stops along the way, where you can go in with an objective in mind, solve that objective, and hopefully not get stuck in there, and then get the heck out of Dodge, go back and heal up and gain levels and restore resources. Though honestly, beyond a certain point, what most people do is they find a safe place to camp and they throw a wizard lock spell up, and so it's gosh, I don't know what else can I say, man. You got any other thoughts? You've read this whole thing.
My personal opinion is, like I said, it is the best mega dungeon that's been created. There's a lot of mega dungeons out there, and they definitely are. They waffle between amazing and whatever, but this was the one. I mean, it's just from the very, very beginning where you approach the mausoleum, and basically not killers, but the party is given the decision right away. Do we go down this well, which obviously, that looks like we can go down there, but everybody's told you don't do it, or do you go to the mausoleum that has the leering? Are they real? Are they not real? These green gargoyles staring at you, and it's like from the very beginning. It isn't like a lot of other dungeons where like the very first choice you make isn't that big of a deal. It's a huge deal. I mean, I've had party wipes from people approaching and just like and where half the party runs away and leave the parallel and those people roll up new characters and you start again. I mean, it's a character killer. I mean, you have to be so careful. Yeah. But in a good way. In a good way.
Yeah. You need to think your way through it. That's people think of mega dungeons as big hack and slay fests, and there's plenty of hack and slash in Wrath and Ethic. But keep in mind, for anyone who's read my book of Dirty Tricks, I don't give experience points for combat. So fighting's always a bad idea in my games. And looking for ways to avoid combats, or to run, you can't say Umber Hulk anymore in writing, but I can on the air. To have the Umber Hulk chase you and there's a purple worm lair down there and you run as loudly as you can, banging on your shield to get the Umber Hulk and the purple worm to engage with each other. It's kind of like the King Kong fighting the Godzilla thing. You can get the bad guys to brawl on each other too. And that's a way to do stuff. Liberal use of fake gold coins and oil to block somebody from chasing you, and throwing rations to stupid stuff. I mean, all my parties carry that stuff around in bulk to prevent stuff from chasing them down. And it's
so. I'm sorry.
Oh, that was basically it. I mean, that was by the way, thank you for the kind words. I'm pretty proud of the product. I don't know if it's the greatest dungeon ever written or not, but the fact that people buy stuff we write still to this day geeks me out. Everybody who works at our company is a gamer first and a businessman second, which isn't always a smart thing for us, but we're all gamers and we all love the game. I mean, the only non-gamer in the entire group is my wife. So, and we forced her into it a few times.
All right, so let's let Zach talk, and so because he's the COO, and then Bill can interject. So, what is in the foreseeable future for Frog God Games, and what conventions do you see Frog God attending? So, if people wanted to meet up with you guys and talk. Talk about the dungeons. So just, look at. Then Zach, you tell me
what's things that were just said. No, no. Anyway, no. I could. The short answer to that is, Bunnies and Burrows is being redone. The 1977 game about like Watership Down. That we can't use that word. That's coming fairly soonish. City of Brass is the next big D&D release we have coming. That's probably this summer. Casey Christopherson is working on that with a guy I've worked with before. I was with Frog God named Edwin Nagy. They're working on that real hard. We've got some really great artists on the City of Brass. It's going to be good. It's not a box set. Just not to disappoint anybody, but it's not like it was before. Then after that, we have the Lost Lands World Campaign setting with these giant poster maps that are so beautiful that I wish I could share, and I cannot. But Bill is working on that one with everybody. He's taking up the mantle of project managing again for the first time in a while, just because to make sure this world map stuff comes out great, the setting. Following that, we have it could be one of a couple things, but Mega Heroes, Jim Wampler, who did Mutant Call Classics, is writing a superheroes game for us, a completely separate non-D20 superheroes game that based on reputation and like 3 or 4 stats to make a fast play, non-champion style superheroes game. So to bring all the superheroes RPG nerds out of the closet, that's what he says.
Yeah. I assumed you talked about bunnies while I was off grabbing a soda.
I did.
Okay.
And I mean, the one thing I'm looking forward to is the Lost Lands campaign setting. Anything that expands the world where Rapanath inhabits gets me excited.
But to add to something that Bill said earlier, he brought Pat Lowinger and talk about the authors that they couldn't fit everything that they wanted to in these books. They wrote so much great stuff. These are the same guys writing this one coming. Now, I'm not invited to write this one. Who's invited? The guys who wrote all the old Necromancer stuff.
Yep.
With Bill leading them to make sure that it molds how he sees it, and then we have other people to make sure it all makes sense.
Yeah, the writing cast on this thing's pretty impressive, man. It's Pat Lowinger, it's a guy named Mark Greenberg, Casey Christopherson, of course, because in Necromancer days I didn't leave home without him. Vicky Potter is going to be working on a big section of kind of the ancient kingdoms area where like Mesopotamia and Necropolis were. And she's one of the finest writers I've ever worked with. Anthony Pryor and Rhiannon Louv are doing the what would be called, I guess, the Asian portion of the Lost Lands, the far west coast, which is kind of ironic because it's not the east. Hang on, my dog kicked the door open. It's really noisy. Hang on.
This conversation you're having that is like long and winding, and then all of a sudden he leaves to do something like that. This is called Monday for me.
Yeah. Yeah. But no, the Lost Lands campaign saying the big thing really is like Zach mentioned is that Robert Altbauer has the I guess what I'd call a semi-final draft of the map done, and I don't know how many posters this thing's gonna end up having, but it's gonna be a lot. It'll be really reminiscent of
probably at least 6. And I'll be honest with you, we made sure that the size of that map was so big in resolution on the computer file that it literally has to use like the Photoshop giant file format, not regular PSD. So we can go in and layered map, and we can make sure we can add the things that we need to add without bothering Robert 900 times. Because we're going to start allowing people to write things in the Lost Lands publishing. And in order to do that, you need to have a beautiful place to start, and that map's the key. And Lance, because you're the man, I'll show you another example of that map sometime this week. Just can't show anybody else.
So okay, not live then is what you're saying.
Yeah.
No, not live.
No,
not yet. Not yet. We'll show it live at some point, but it's mighty, man, and
it's great.
Yeah, it's really mighty, and it is really something. And the thing is, because my original game world was based on. I think Lance, you've seen a photo of it before, I think.
Yeah. I like this story. Tell the story.
Yeah, so we put together this series of 8.5 by 11 hand drawn things back in the late 70s and early 80s, and then a couple buddies and I watercolored them. And at some point, I can show. I hate showing it because it's got so many intellectual property violations that like even posting it up as a picture makes it dangerous.
Yeah, Matt said no. He just texted me and said no.
No, Bill. Anyway,
he didn't text, but he would have texted and said no.
Yeah. Anyway, it's getting the thing framed cost me about $500 because it's like a really weird size. It's like 8 sheets across, so whatever that is, 64 inches, right? And then like 6 or 7 deep at 11. So it's like, it's like 64 by 66. But it's so cool that my wife actually lets me hang it above the dining room table on the wall behind where I sit at the dining room table in our dining room. And the guy who takes care of our house and stuff while we're out of town accidentally bumped it and busted the thing about a month and a half ago, busted the glass. And Krista, without even involving me or making me do it, immediately got it fixed and had it back up, because she was like, it doesn't look right without this thing up. So, but yeah, so I usually don't show that one off online too much, because it's got stuff like, Mount Doom and all the Stephen R. Donaldson, Lord Falsbane lore is
probably
in
has
there.
Moss Eisley too, knowing Bill. So
it does. It has Moss Eisley. And
this is why I'm on videos with him, just so you know.
Yeah. And it's got Moss Eisley, and it's got it's got some others. I mean, but that's what you did back then, right? I mean, you read the books, you saw the movies. There's a lot of Conan references on it. I mean, it was definitely influenced a lot. I was a really, really prolific reader. I read hundreds and hundreds of fantasy books when I was a kid, which is something I think people need to do more of now. That they don't do as much as they used to. I mean, I read everything. I was just like, gobble, 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 3 books a week type guy. And especially the old Weird Tales stories. Those were just awesome,
All right. Well, okay. So I don't want to, I don't know how late or if you guys turn into pumpkins soon, but we can start, cooling things off. So you kind of touched on something that I wanted to actually have you pontificate on, Bill. Yep. So I've read your book, Dirty Tricks, for Dungeon Masters, and I think everybody should read that. Even if you don't use any of the dirty tricks in there, it definitely puts a good mindset, I think, in a way. I mean, nowadays when we play Pathfinder, when we play 5th edition, the role playing is more of a it's a mutually created story that reaches a satisfying end. And I've talked about this a lot. Whereas you just earlier, about an hour and a half ago or so, you said that it was much more adversarial when you and I started playing D&D. It was like the DM tried to kill you. I mean, they wanted to put your characters in the ground. And not unfairly. They didn't have a red dragon swoop in the first moment you stepped outside the castle and breathe fire and you die. It was a very brutal game.
Yeah.
And but what would you say to somebody that wants to start dungeon mastering, that wants to start running a game? What would you tell them? What do you think is the best advice you possibly can give somebody that wants to run their own campaign?
This is actually really easy for me to say, and it is let the players do what the players want to do. And so the hardest thing about running a game in sort of that old style or whatever else is that you've designed this huge thing and you're all prepped for it and the players go left and you're like, uh-oh. So how do you improv into letting them do what they want to do rather than railroading them? It's so much, all the games I run these days, both at home, over in Seattle when I'm over there, working on that Tuesday night game, or whether I'm at a convention, I react to what the players do, and I create the story around what it is that they're doing and how they're having fun. So, if it seems like I've got a group that really wants to fight a bunch of stuff, well, I add a little more combat in. If it seems like I've got a group that's more, more interested in thinking and thought and working their way through puzzles and solving something difficult, I'll roll with that and I'll style the game that way. So I'm much more learn how to be a storyteller is the number one thing, and let the players contribute to that story and react to their contributing to that story, so that they're what they're interested in doing and the things that they kind of go off on their own weird little tangents to. Don't worry about what's written down on the piece of paper. I actually don't run games with anything other than 2 dice.
True.
Yeah, a 6-sided and a 20-sided, right?
Correct. True. Yeah, great big ones. And my daughter, probably the best compliment I ever got as a dungeon master was in Detroit, actually, about 3 years ago. I was running a game for about 17 or 18 people at Yukon, and a guy goes to my daughter after the game. He's like, "Man," he goes, that was the best adventure I've ever had. Your dad must spend hours prepping for this stuff." And Jillian just kind of goes, "No, he just makes the shit up as he goes along." I came in there with some notes on a puzzle that was a color. It was a color puzzle, and that was I came in with literally a little tic-tac-toe diagram with some letters on it, and other than that, I just ran the game as it was.
I can attest. The first time I was at a convention with Bill working for Frog God, and he looks at me, he goes, "I have a game in 5 minutes," and he looked, "Wonder what I should do." I'm like, at first I was like, "Oh no, this could go real bad." Then I watched the first part of the game, and it was just really smooth because he let the players control it. I laughed because it's a funny question when someone asks you that. Your boss is like, "Well, what should I plan?" I'm like, "Well, shoot." But honestly, it works well. He runs games with 18 or 20 people, and we have to turn people away from games. And he will take so many people. We could have double that size if we just had a room that big and we had 2 bills. We don't.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Sometimes, thank God. But most
so do you roll your dice in front of the players so they
always
see what happens?
I always the way I control a table with dice is everybody rolls them out in the open. You don't roll till it's your turn; it doesn't count. And so I roll all my dice in front of them. Sometimes I'm not an adversarial DM at all. But if the dice say you're dead, you're dead. So I never cheat. I do find, and I wrote this in a book someplace, at some point, I think that I believe that most DMs cheat a lot, and I don't think they cheat to screw the players over. I think they cheat to save them. And so, without absent the risk of getting killed, I think the game loses something. But, just like anything else, if you cheat, you get that kind of result. And, and some people like to run a softer game than I do. I get that. That's fine. I find that by never cheating, sometimes it hoses me. I mean, that one kid last year got a staff of wizardry at 3rd level because it was like a completely random treasure, and that's what he ended up getting, right? So now we have to contend with that in our games in Madison. Because the guy's got a staff of wizardry, but it was like what the dice said it was, so I let it roll. But yeah, so just to close on that, is it let the players help tell the story, learn how to improvise, and learn how to be quick on your feet, because they're not going to do what you expect them to do. And the number one thing that can destroy the fun of a game is railroading the party, where the party doesn't feel like they have free will and choice in what they're doing. And so avoiding that at all costs is huge.
I agree with that 1,000%. The worst campaigns I've ever been involved in as a player have been where, enjoy your choice of one. It was just kind of like, well, we have to do this. I mean, and then it just seems like you have your linear story that you're just kind of along for the ride, and the DM is just telling you what's happening to your players, and that kind of stinks. Yeah. So.
And for people who need to learn how to do that a little bit, I'll put in a big plug for my buddy John Stater. He's on Lulu, Stater, and he does these big books of hex crawls. All they are is random hex crawl stuff with 2-paragraph, 3-paragraph descriptions of an encounter area or a village or some weird artifact or something like that. And you can literally wander around the wilderness and you run into all these cool things. And if you go left, maybe you find this. And if you go right, maybe you find this, and maybe it ties to the thing that's 2 hexes left. And he does a phenomenal job, and he cranks this stuff out. It's cheap too, man. It's like $15 or $20 to get a hard copy of like an 80-page hex crawl deal on Lulu. And we published 7 of his. He wrote 7 of them for us that are called Hex Crawl Chronicles or something like that. We sell them as PDFs. They're not in print anymore. Lance, you probably have them. But it's a really good way to learn to improv when the party is, you've got notes on something, but it's not scripted, right? And it's not. And if they don't go there, who cares? They go there instead. And it's really fun, I think, for the party when they can do that. Here, let me introduce somebody real quick. Speaking of improv. So this is our future creative director, Johnny Webb. He's been running games at conventions for 3 years now.
Hey, John.
And he's the same way as me. He runs his game every Sunday with his group of friends, and also at conventions for mostly adults. And your prep consists of what? Grabbing a first edition DM guide and a Sword Wizard rule book and not much else. He rolls with what they want to do off of a basic master plan. You know, and if they go left, they go left. If they go right, they go right, and he reacts accordingly. And it's a pretty fun game. He's got these kids are the one little girl's dad, which is not that little anymore. She's 13, but one girl's dad told me that it was actually on her calendar now, just like her ballet lessons and her soccer practices and games, is D&D at John's. So pretty neat stuff.
Cool. So, well, I mean, I can't thank you guys enough for taking the time to be on. Like, I always really enjoy. If I missed it, what conventions are you guys gonna be at this in 2018?
Well, always at North Texas RPG Con, always at Gamehole Con, and I think always at Gary Con. And then Zach, you're going to at least one more, right?
I'm going to two more probably, but the one I'm sure I'm going to is I'm going to the Red River Con or at Shreveport. Why I'm going there is because Bill told me I should go to a small con if they asked me, so I said yes. And I'm also going to Crit Hit Con in Phoenix, which is my local con. I've never been to a local con in Arizona. I've been to 200 cons, it feels like now, in 5 years. But I've never been to one in Arizona, so I'll be there this summer too, representing the Frog.
Yeah. And then we're going to show up in droves to support our one of our fabulous cartographers, Alyssa Fadden. We're all going to go this summer. We're all going to Infilad, and I dug out I dug out a whole bunch of my old World War II miniatures for Flames of War version 1, and I guess they're on version 4 now. It's been a while since I played, but I got the version 4 rules, and so I'm making armies for a few folks, and we're going to go there and gloriously and valiantly die in the Flames of War tournament against people who actually have played the game in the last 15 years.
That's in Olympia, Washington. So,
yeah.
Very cool. Well, Zach, Bill, thank you again for taking the time to be on and for taking me down the walk down the way. I've got to get to Gamehole Con. I gotta actually meet you guys for real these days.
Totally, man. I know some people, and actually the guy who runs that's a guy named Alex Cameron. I don't know if Zach mentioned this, but just as a quick little side note, I asked him to write a short adventure involving Sahagin and a Seacoast deal, because he's one of the writers who's worked for us and does like the Quest of Doom books and stuff. And after about 3 days, that thing's turned into a full-length book. He's no longer writing a short adventure. He got inspired, and so he's the guy who runs Gamehole Con. He's actually writing a sizable piece of work for us here that we'll know a lot more about when he tells me how big it's going to be. But it sounds like it's going to be pretty big.
Awesome.
All right, boys. Well, again, thank you very much. And until what's the next Kickstarter to this one? Is it going to be City of Brass, or is it going to be Lost Lands?
It'll be Bunnies and Burrows. Something else.
Bunnies and Burrows, and then
Bunnies and Burrows. Okay.
City of Brass will be summer, and remind me next time. Remind me next time, and I'll bring my Viking hat, man. I have a 14-gauge steel. Well, it's a horn helmet, so it's not really a Viking hat, but it looks, it's one of the stereotypical Viking hat. Guy made it for me for a bachelor party.
Viking hat, if you will.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right. Good night, boys.
All right, man. Thank you very much.